Greetings, everybody. Hello. This is a little message, I suppose, to all my friends and family and everyone who's wished me happy birthday. Never had so many happy birthday wishes, and I just thought I'd take the chance to reflect on this last year since my last birthday and share a few thoughts that have been bubbling away in my mind. A kind of update. So the first thing to say is last birthday, this is in 2010, I was living down in Sussex at Chithurst, and we had a very little party there with a student who I taught at Poole Grammar School, who was in the philosophy club, and Richard Ellis, a scientist, Sarah Miles, the actress, Joan Budd, my daughters and others. Now, I can't believe it's only a year since that party. That's completely ridiculous. I love living at Chithurst in West Sussex. It's a beautiful part of the world. But time moves on, and I was then teaching at Monarchs School, a beautiful all-girls private school in Eastbourne, which I loved as head of RE. But then soon after that, around the time of the birthday, I was offered a chance to come and live in this castle in Scotland, the Castle of the Muses, and the potential here is so awesome that I, with reluctance, decided to leave Sussex and Chithurst and move up here to Argyll, which is the most exquisite location. The scenery, the energies. I'm close to Iona, close to Oban, close to Mull, but also not too far from Glasgow, so it's easy to access. And I would like this place to become a long-term base for my institute and my educational work. And that really wasn't going to be possible in Sussex. Sadly, since then, Joan Budd, who was there at the party last year, an elderly, wonderful Sussex lady, one of triplets, died. And it was her time, as it were. And, you know, events move on. My daughter's about to graduate from University of Sussex in Brighton, and so it's a real pleasure to be here. What have I done since then? Well, I came up and went to the Papal Mass, actually, in Glasgow, which was a wonderful event. I hadn't met this current Pope before. I met some extraordinary local Catholics from Balloch in Loch Lomond, and it was just a real pageant in Glasgow that day in September. And you know, I met some Knights of the Holy Sepulchre wandering around the streets of Glasgow with their wonderful long cloaks, and so on. Some extraordinary encounters. And this leads me to really the most important thing I've been doing, two things really, since I came here. I've been on sabbatical, as it were, from my teaching, official teaching role in the secondary school sector. But I still am, obviously, deeply interested and involved in religious studies. And so what I've been using my time for is two things. Firstly, running a small course up here once a month. And but secondly, is recording a commentary of discourse on the great scriptures of mankind. I've stepped back from the coalface of RE classrooms, as it were, for the time being. And I'm working on a higher level of discourse about religious education, and what I'm looking at is the four great faiths of mankind, to put it in a nutshell. I'm doing a commentary on the Qur'an at the moment, surah by surah, using the Arabic, using the scholarly apparatus. What does the Qur'an actually mean? And I'm using my own doctoral research into transpersonal history to try and explain from within the psychological significance of passages in the Qur'an in a way that really I don't think was possible before the 21st or 20th century. Modern psychology, the understanding of spirituality, the understanding of phenomena like channeling, the understanding of the way that the mind can access higher levels of consciousness, the kind of models of the human psyche that have been developed since Jung and Assagioli, the founder of psychosynthesis, and Ken Wilber and Stan Grof, and all the work that was started in the 60s in the States and Britain and around the world in transpersonal psychology, I think now gives us a sophisticated intellectual tool to look at the revealed scriptures of mankind, like the Qur'an, and say, aha, that's what was going on. That's why Muhammad got that message. I'm looking at it in the biographical context of his life as well. Like the surah on the jinn, when according to the Qur'an, these spiritual beings that are known as jinn in Arabic, overheard him praying and were so impressed by the Qur'an, they became Muslims, you see. So this is a wonderful spiritual fact. Now, how on earth can we make sense of that? Well, you know, in the lives of the great saints of mankind, another figure is Saint Columba, who's from Iona, just near here. These people have what we call paranormal experiences. You know, there's hundreds of reportings of Columba's life, written up by Saint Adamnan, who was an abbot of Iona after him, of what we would call transpersonal or occult experiences. To ordinary people, they seem like magic, right? But to the saints, they are everyday occurrences, more or less. And transpersonal history gives us a tool scientifically to understand and study these kind of paranormal or transcendental experiences, okay? So that's what I'm trying to use in the study of the Qur'an. And I'm also doing the same with the New Testament texts. I'm doing a commentary on the New Testament in parallel, starting with the Gospel of Matthew. And I've been working through the Gospel of Matthew, but bringing to that an enormous amount of scholarly research by New Testament scholars into the meaning of the text, the Greek, the reconstructed Aramaic. You know, what was the actual source, the text of the Synoptic Gospels, as they're called. Looking at the Proto-Evangelium, which is the pre-birth narrative of Jesus, going into Mary's parentage and history. There's lots in the New Testament which is implied, but not actually in the text. So what I'm doing in the commentary is filling in the missing bits, so that people who are interested in Christianity, but don't know much about it, and maybe the New Testament doesn't really speak to them, hopefully from the commentary we'll get it, yeah? And then thirdly, I'm also looking at the Jewish scriptures, the Tanakh as it's known. And I'm not commenting on the Torah, the first 5 books, or the Navim, the prophets. I've chosen to do a commentary on the Ketuvim, the writings, Psalms, Proverbs, the wisdom scriptures, Ecclesiastes and so on. These are extraordinarily fascinating documents of universal spiritual importance. So I'm doing again a scholarly commentary using my knowledge of Hebrew, of the Kabbalah, of mystical Judaism, to explain the innermost messages really for mankind of those holy scriptures. And then fourthly, what I'm going to be doing is a commentary on what I call the Pagan Bible. Now this is a compilation I'm putting together of pagan scriptures from Druid, Wiccan, Runic, Hindu, Taoist, you know, the universal pagan tradition, which is like the shamanic tradition of mankind, the earliest tradition. And then doing a comment on some of those texts. Now, the point of doing this, why bother? You know, it's, I suppose, to increase understanding. The purpose of this, as an educator, I always want to increase understanding. The hypothesis I work with, ever since working at the Institute of Education at the University of London back in the late 80s and onwards, creating an Institute of Peace Studies there, is that through more knowledge, through more education, through more learning and wisdom, we humans on this planet can share it in love and kindness with each other. You know, I still take the view that ignorance and you know, fear is born of ignorance. We don't understand each other's cultures, each other's religions, each other's paths. So we're afraid of each other, so we shoot and kill and, you know, bomb and maim. I'm dedicated my life to this task of education as the path to peace on this planet. I still believe it's one of the most significant paths, if not the. So that's kind of what I'm doing here at the Castle of the Muses. Friends visit, come on retreat. It's a retreat centre, study centre. My huge library of 12,000 books plus thousands of documents and archives built up since the work at the university way back in the 80s is all here, safe. This year's been momentous also in terms of the Middle East generally, the uprisings in Cairo, the unresolved problems of Libya, Syria, as I speak. I've been in touch with friends in Egypt and you know, feel very, on the one hand, excited at the Arab Spring, at the you know, the sense of standing up for one's rights in Middle Eastern countries, but also fearful that the changes might, you know, have to be done non-violently, have to be managed in a creative and loving way in the Middle East. I've been involved with attempts to create a European Union Mediation Service, had communications with Baroness Ashton about I believe the European Union should formally set up a mediation service so that when countries neighbouring the European Union fall apart and come into civil war and conflict, we would send in a team of official, paid, professional mediators, neutral, not politicians, but bureaucrats, who would sit down with both parties until they've resolved it non-violently. And this would be an adjunct to whatever other foreign policy things are being produced. I believe it's in the long-term and short-term interest of the European Union and of Britain to have our neighbours live in peace and not collapse into civil war. And so I've been frustrated at the slowness of getting that mechanism going, although I planted the seeds and have had communication from Baroness Ashton and so on saying it's a great idea. Their response, of course, is to say we don't have the funds to do this. I would say that's absurd, because what the European Union is doing is duplicating embassies with vast expense. I believe millions and millions of euros are going into this, getting diplomatic cars, you know, creating the apparatus of a diplomatic elite waving, you know, the European flag, which I don't think is necessary. What we should be doing as a European Union is doing what we're quite good at in Europe, which is learning how not to make wars. You know, the First World War and Second World War were like European civil wars. We eventually grew out of them after mass slaughter, and we created this thing, the European Union, which Churchill and other visionary statesmen kind of dreamed into being as a long-term peace settlement for Europe. Now that's a gift we can give to our neighbours. They can't all join the European Union, but at least we can give them the gift of the wisdom of peace. So that's another project I've been working on, and very frustrated, you know, it's not been able to be effective. And then the winter, of course, was very, very harsh here. It was an extraordinary experience living up in Scotland during this winter just gone. It was very cold, but very incredibly beautiful. The snow's just awesomely beautiful. And it reminded me of my time back in Canada in the 70s. I haven't experienced such harsh winter since living in Canada, in Calgary. But I love that as a Canadian dual citizen. That felt like coming home. There's a very close link between Scotland and Canada, I feel. So it's like kind of almost being in Canada again. And I did use the time to write and to develop the teaching of the course on transpersonal history, which has been happening at the end of every month, last Saturday of the month. And I've recorded a whole series of teachings there, which are available. You can access those. There have been some sad deaths to report. Brian Feldstein of Brian Vision Dance, an old friend of mine who worked with the Stonehenge Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we go back a very long way, died just a couple of months ago, unexpectedly, of cancer. And that's always something that reminds us of our mortality, which is why I think it's very important to live life to the full, savour and treasure each moment. When I went to Israel just recently, I put a little prayer in the Wailing Wall in the Western Wall of Jerusalem for Brian, because he was a kind of, well, he was Jewish, but he was very much on the new wave of consciousness. He was very much a pioneer of spirituality, and what he called social acupuncture, which is that we humans that are what Ken Wilber calls at the growing tip of mankind have to do little symbolic acts to increase the general quota of consciousness on the planet. Consciousness is the kind of the quantum of knowledge, if you want. And the more we can increase consciousness individually and collectively, spread the wisdom, spread the enlightenment energy, if you want, the more quickly we're going to get peace. So I'm sure Brian's still helping, just on a different level. And in fact, it was Brian who last interviewed me. And sadly, he's no more there. And another spiritual teacher, much more famous and on a different level, of course, who's died this last year, is Sai Baba, who I visited in his ashram in India. I've always felt a sympathy with Sai Baba's work. I think he was a great educator, he was a mystic. He was totally devoted to his educational work. When I was in India, I met the Vice-Chancellor of his university, which I'm sure these institutions will live on. The fact that he's physically died is irrelevant. His spirit is still there. These great yogis, they resonate on through eternity. And his teachings are there, his commitment to peace, to meditation, to prayer, his vision of ecumenical harmony. What Sai Baba said is, if you want to become my devotee, don't change your religion. Stay a Christian, stay a Buddhist, stay a Hindu, stay a Muslim or a Jew. Just do it better. Be a better Jew, be a better Christian. I'd say exactly the same. That's the level of enlightenment teaching that we all need on the planet. At Easter, I went up to Oban to the service at the Episcopalian Cathedral there. I met the Bishop, Kevin, who's the Bishop of Argyll and the Isles. I mean, he's a wonderful character. Oban is a beautiful town. It's on the way to Iona. And in August, I hope to lead a pilgrimage. If anyone wants to come and join us, you're very welcome. Have a couple of talks here at the castle and then go on up to Iona, which is... It was regarded by the Celtic Church as sacred as Rome, really. What Columba and these other monks were doing there, the mystics, was combining the ancient Druid wisdom, the teaching of the Celtic mystics over the millennia, with the Christian teachings. Christ said, Columba said, Christ is my Druid. He was an aristocrat from the Irish royal family who devoted his life to spiritual wisdom. And I think that work is, still needs to be done. I was very interested when I last went to Iona. I discovered King Charles I rebuilt the cathedral there. Charles was a deeply mystical man himself, and probably shouldn't have been a king. He should have retired and become a druid and gone and lived on Iona. And what he was saying about the divine right of kings, what he really meant was the divine duty of kings, the responsibility of kings, to be sensitive to spirit, to understand the higher level of realities, which was the function of the sacred kingship of ancient times. And some people know I've also been involved in the project of the Council of Monarchs, which has been bubbling away, to try and bring the monarchs of the planet to live up to their duties, to be a beacon for order and harmony and peace on the planet. As the Peace Druid of Britain, my duty is to say to these monarchs, do your work properly. Get peace on this planet. And some of them, the King of Spain, King of Saudi Arabia, have been doing amazing work. And of course Queen Elizabeth does amazing work behind the scenes for the Commonwealth in her Christmas message, and just spreading light and harmony in her own way. And this year has seen the wonderful film The King's Speech about her father. So these monarchs behind the scene do amazing work. I'm just saying, if they came together once a year and swapped stories, wouldn't that be an amazing thing for the planet? If you liked the royal wedding, you would like the Council of Monarchs even more, because it would be like that times 30. You can hear more about that project. I've recorded another talk about that. For my own Druid work, I've been working on the Mount Hemus lecture, which I'll be giving in April next year in Salisbury, which is a study of Druidry in relation to transpersonal history, and it's been a fascinating several months of intense research into how the methodology of transpersonal history can shed light on the ancient history of Druidry. And because transpersonal history is about looking at the spiritual history of man in a scientific way, I think it can shed a lot of light on the history of Druidry. The royal wedding, I think, was very significant. It was a beautiful event, and I was amazed how druidical it was. The trees in the Abbey. I know Westminster Abbey well. I used to go to Evensong there. It's a sacred place to me. Darwin's there, Chaucer, Newton, all the great poets. It's a shrine for the collective intelligence of British culture, really. And although some people say, no, it's a military shrine, there's too many flags, you know, sadly in the real world, there have been very great soldiers in this country, and what I hope and pray for as a peace druid is that non-violence and skillful diplomacy becomes the way of solving problems. It's a very blunt instrument. I mean, it's a ridiculously blunt instrument to have to drop bombs on Gaddafi's tanks and so on, you know, as a way of making peace in Libya. We should be sending teams of bureaucrats to make these guys sit down and make peace. And the same in Afghanistan, which is continuing. And I want to just comment on that, really. The death of Bin Laden, Osama Bin Laden, just recently announced, is obviously an epochal event, I think. And I'm taking at face value, contrary to all the kind of conspiracy theorists out there on the web, that that event did happen as President Obama reported. I don't believe presidents, you know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Presidents are monitored and they're answerable to history. They have staff, they have, you know, their actions are subjected to minute scrutiny by historians, and future historians will look at the Obama presidency for good and ill. And it will say one of the defining moments is when Obama sanctioned and then actioned the attempted capture and then death of Osama Bin Laden. I think conspiracy theorists that sort of claim it's not true are living in cloud cuckoo land. You should go and do a history degree, okay? But, you know, why did it take so long? Obviously the Pakistanis, someone very high up knew he was there and was sheltering him. Maybe there's a split inside Pakistani military intelligence and governance. We know that. The country's in some turmoil. I think we should take that death as a kind of marking the ending of an epoch which started in 2001. And let's put behind us the violence that last you know, decade and more has symbolised. To me, in my commentary on the Qur'an that I'm doing, Osama Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and you know, that interpretation of religion is what's outmoded. Okay, that most kind of people that adopt violence of any kind in relation to religion are misreading the texts absolutely and unconditionally. They're misreading the text, the Qur'an in this instance, but Christians do it, and Jews sadly sometimes do it, you know. All these texts can be read as mandates to violence. But they can also be read as mandates to find peace in spite of human violence. You know, the Bible's full of violence, wars, killings and so on. But the great prophets of mankind always say, you know, peace is the goal. And it's the same in the Qur'an. And if you challenge me on this, and if you say I'm misinterpreting the Qur'an, you know, listen to my commentary, look at it, read it, because, you know, Orthodox Islam, true Islam, is not about violence. The Osama Bin Laden interpretation of Islam was false. It was erroneous intellectually and spiritually and ethically. And anyone out there who still thinks that's the valid interpretation of what the Qur'an wants, you know, please listen to my commentary. You're wrong. And Muhammad himself would, I believe, endorse the kind of interpretation I'm giving to the Qur'an, and that's so important for this era. So let's see this death of Bin Laden as the tragic ending of a very tragic episode in human history, when some religious fundamentalists thought that killing in the name of God was somehow sanctioned. It's not. It's premised on a misreading of apocalyptic traditions. The apocalypse, the idea of the end of the world, the last judgment, the good and evil being sorted, and everything, you know, going up in flames. That's what this is about, and that is a total misreading. The actual tradition of apocalypse goes back to Zoroaster and the role of the Saiyashant, who opens the doorway between this world and the next world. The true apocalypse means the uncovering or revealing, okay? And that's not about violence. That's the equivalent of what we call a near-death experience, when your soul at death goes into the other realms, and there are so many people who've had this experience now. that I think is scientifically proved that the soul survives death, right? And that's the apocalypse, when you're revealed to that other world and you have your own judgment, your life review. I don't think it's a terrible, violent, horrible, traumatic thing. Muhammad overemphasized hell. He was living in a pre-scientific era. He didn't know about the real facts underlying this. He was an intuitive mystic and a prophet who kind of had his visions, but it wasn't backed by science in those days. Now we can do that. So that's what I'm trying to explain. And I want to end by saying that just recently I was invited to a conference in Israel, which met at Ramat Gan outside Tel Aviv, of amazing light workers from all over the planet. Visionaries, I would say, mystics. You know, it was a pleasure to be there amongst my friends and colleagues. And the children of Israel, in the bigger sense of light workers who work with the Elohim, the spiritual forces that created this universe, however you understand that to be, okay? What they're trying to do, and what I'm going to try and help them to do, is, and what they are doing, and what I was so impressed by, is they're ushering in a new level of consciousness on the planet. You know, where we've got to go as a planet, putting behind us the violence of the Bin Ladens and the terrorists, right? Just growing out of all that stuff, is we have to then see, well, what kind of a world of peace do we want? It's going to be a world of beauty, a world of the arts, a world of love, a world of equality, a world of social justice, a world of living lightly on the earth, and a world of learning and study. In Judaism, in the Kabbalah, it said whenever a sage or sages come together to study the sacred texts, the Shekinah is with them. The Shekinah is the Holy Spirit. It's the goddess which hovers over the work. And when I went to Jerusalem with this group of people, we planted some crystals on the Mount of Olives overlooking the old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, which is probably the most contested place on the planet right now. It's become a symbol of miscomprehension between religions, right? And I had this vision, I mean, I've had it before, but I saw it as actually possible this time, which is we need to open the Golden Gate on the east wall of Jerusalem's old city. Now this gate is technically only going to be open when the Messiah comes, right? And the Messiah is going to go through that gate and usher in a world of peace, you know. Now, it's been shut for a very long time, since about 1561, I believe, the Ottoman Sultan closed it. And even the British, when we had Jerusalem in the Mandate, didn't open it. To me, I think it's time to open it in the name of all the people and all the religions and all the spiritual teachers and all the messiahs that are out there and alive here on this planet now. And my vision is with the permission of the authorities who control the Temple Mount, that's the Israeli government, the Israeli army, the mayor of Jerusalem, and the Waqf, which is the Islamic council that operate the mosque and the Dome of the Rock, that we should all together open that gate, and all the religious leaders of mankind, you know, representatives of, should walk in together in a line, nobody going first. So the Hindu, the Jain, the Buddhist, the Sikh, the Zoroastrian, the different kinds of Christians, the different Muslims, you know, the papal representative of the Pope himself, if he'll come, you know. Let's all go through in a line. The Druids can go, you know, I'll come in the very back as the Peace Druid of Britain, right? I'm saying as a Druid, it's time to open that gate. The messianic consciousness of mankind is bubbling away. I think it's about ready to open it, you know. We the people want peace. We want a world of love. That's what the promise of the 60s was about. That's what Brian Vision stood for, and you know, and that's what the people I was with just now in Israel stand for. So let's open the gate, have that procession going in. 2012 is a good year, it seems to me, the end of the Mayan long count. December the 21st, the winter solstice, symbolising the return of the light. And let's put a little peace tent on the Temple of the Mount there, where people can go and discuss and have conversations and share a coffee, and there'll be a little meditation area where they can sit and pray in their own way, as the prophet Micah said. Each person pray to their God in their own way. We need tolerance and harmony between the religions. And to do it in that place would be such a beautiful message to the rest of the world. Yeah, we can outgrow our problems. We don't need to blow each other up. You can be a Muslim, I'll be a Jain, you can be a Druid, I'll be a Kabbalist. You know, we can still love each other as human beings. You can be a humanist, you can be an atheist, you can be a socialist, you can be a conservative. At the end of the day, we've all got two eyes, you know, a nose and a heart. So that's my vision for 2012. It's going to be a busy year. That's what I'm celebrating this birthday. That's a little snippet, right? I just wanted to share that with my friends who've so kindly wished me a happy birthday. I wish you in turn, you know, a happy rebirth day for the whole planet. I want this planet to be at peace. That's why I'm working as a scholar on these commentaries. It's all there. It's encoded in the Kabbalah, in Sufism, in ancient Zoroastrian texts. The wisdom teachings of mankind are there, and they're available now in a way that they've never been before. We're living in a stupendous era. We have technology, the internet. Thank you, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, for organising that. You know, it's a fantastic world here, and let's prove worthy of it, is what I would say. Let's open that golden gate and live happily ever after. Okay, so many happy returns, planet Earth. Thank you.